Hello to all our Vidyarthis. I am Shweta Ma'am. Welcomes to you all on a premier digital learning platform named as Vidyarthi Pro Learning Platform. We are with you for your journey from dream aspirants to dream achievers. Today we are going to discuss about very important multiple choice questions of the second unit of the business economics, that is consumer behavior and demand. These specially handpicked questions are very important for your exams like CUET, CACPT, BCom, MCom, BBA, NET JRF, UPHESC, UPPSC, and many more other entrance examination papers. Okay consumers, so let's move to our question series. Do you think आपने गलत सुना consumers? No. You are absolutely right, and yes, you heard right. So as our name of the chapter is consumer behavior and demand, so the first part is consumer behavior. What do you understand by the consumer behavior? Who are the consumers? The consumers are me, you, all of the other people around you. Even everyone is a consumer, as everyone is our consumer. So, and everyone behaves very differently. So, consumer behavior is the actions or decisions, processes of people who purchase goods and services for personal consumption. There is a bit difference between consumer and customer. Customer is the person who purchases, but the consumer is the person who consumes the products and services. For example, अगर आपने एक चॉकलेट खरीदी है, ठीक है, सो यू आर द कस्टमर फॉर दैट चॉकलेट, बट जो उस आपने वो चॉकलेट किसी बच्चे को गिफ्ट कर दी, सो दैट चाइल्ड इज अ कंज्यूमर ऑफ दैट फॉर दैट चॉकलेट. देयर इज द वेरी बेसिक डिफरेंस बिटवीन कस्टमर एंड कंज्यूमर. एंड उसके पीछे का जो हमारा बिहेवियर होता है, जिसकी वजह से, जिन फैक्टर्स की वजह से हमारा ये डिसीजन होता है टू परचेज समथिंग, एनी प्रोडक्ट और सर्विस, दैट इज mainly known as consumer behavior. Okay consumers, so let's move to our questions, and our first question is, consumer behavior is studied in which of the following options? Option number 1 is microeconomics, option number 2 is macroeconomics, option number 3 is income analysis, and option number 4 is none of the above. So the correct answer is option number 1, microeconomics. Microeconomics deals with the individual approach of various parties involved in an economy, that consumer, producer, price and cost. Therefore, it studies consumer behavior, producers equilibrium and factor pricing. Our next question is, which is the first law of Gaussian? Option number 1, law of demand. Option number 2, law of diminishing marginal utility. Option number 3, law of equimarginal utility, and option number 4, consumer's surplus. So the correct answer for this question is law of diminishing marginal utility. Gaussian's first law is the law of diminishing marginal utility, that marginal utilities are diminishing across the ranges relevant to decision making. Our next question is, who basically propounded the concept of law of equimarginal utility? समसीमांत उपयोगिता के नियम की अवधारणा को मूल रूप से किसने प्रतिपादित किया? सो द ऑप्शंस आर, ऑप्शन नंबर 1 रिकार्डो, ऑप्शन नंबर 2 मार्शल, ऑप्शन नंबर 3 गॉसन, ऑप्शन नंबर 4 J.S. मिल. So the correct answer is option number C, Gaussian. Gaussian propounded the concept of law of equimarginal utility. हमारा नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन है, डिमांड कर्व जनरली स्लोप्स. Option number 1, upward from left to right. Option number B, downward from left to right. Option number C, parallel to x axis, मतलब x axis के parallel में. Option number D, और parallel to y axis के parallel में. The correct answer is option number 1, upward from left to right. Upward means ऊपर की तरफ, from left means from बाईं तरफ से, to right from दाहिनी तरफ. Because the demand curve will move downward from the left to right, which expresses the law of demand. As the price of the given commodity increases, the quantity demanded decreases, all else being equal. जितनी भी चीज़ें फैक्टर्स रहेंगे वो कांस्टेंट रहेंगे, बट जो प्राइस है अगर वो इंक्रीज करेगी तो क्वांटिटी डिमांडेड डिक्रीज होगी, और अगर क्वांटिटी डिमांडेड इंक्रीज होगी तो जो प्राइस का फैक्टर है वो डिक्रीज करेगा. Our next question is regarding MU and TU. In this slide, MU means marginal utility and TU means total utility. So the question is, when the marginal utility is falling, TU is what? Option number 1 rising, option number 2 falling, option number 3 constant, or option number 4 maximum. And the correct answer for this question is falling. जब total utility operates hand in hand with marginal utility, which measures the additional satisfaction received from the consumption of a good or services, as long as marginal utility positive होती जाएगी and total utility will increase. Once marginal utility negative, एक बार marginal utility negative ग्राफ पे पहुंच गई, then total utility will decrease. एंड इसी से रिलेटेड हमारा अगला क्वेश्चन भी है, दैट इज फॉलोइंग मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी कर्व शोज विच लॉज. ऑप्शन नंबर 1 लॉ ऑफ डिमिनिशिंग रिटर्न्स, ऑप्शन नंबर 2 लॉ ऑफ डिमिनिशिंग मार्जिनल रेट ऑफ सब्सटीट्यूशन, ऑप्शन नंबर 3 लॉ ऑफ डिमिनिशिंग मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी, और ऑप्शन नंबर 4 नन ऑफ द अबव. So the correct answer for this question is law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution. द मार्जिनल रेट ऑफ सब्सटीट्यूशन, जिसे हम MRS के नाम से भी जानते हैं, द MRS इज द अमाउंट ऑफ अ गुड दैट अ कंज्यूमर इज विलिंग टू कंज्यूम कंपेयर्ड टू अनदर गुड, as long as the new good is equally satisfying. Marginal rate of substitution is used to in difference theory to analyze consumer behavior. Our next question is from very important and very interesting topic, that is saturation. And saturation point means what? Option number 1, when TU is rising and MU is falling, means total utility is rising and marginal utility is falling. Option number 2, TU is falling or MU is negative. Option number 3, TU is maximum and MU is 0. Option number 4, falling MU curve. And the correct answer for this question is TU is maximum and MU is 0. जब total utility maximum हो जाती है और marginal utility 0, मतलब marginal utility 0 होने का मतलब हम उसमें कुछ add on नहीं कर सकते. That point is known as saturation point. When the marginal utility is 0, then the total utility is maximum because any further consumption of that commodity will lead to negative. जब total utility maximum होती है और marginal utility 0 होती है, तब थोड़ा सा भी अगर हम उसमें फर्दर कंजम्पशन ऐड ऑन करते हैं तो वो मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी को नेगेटिव में लेके जाएगा. सो दैट बिकॉज ऑफ दैट दिस वाज द सैचुरेशन पॉइंट. Therefore, it is called the saturation point, as after this total utility will fall due to negative marginal utility. Okay, so let's move to our next question, and our next question is slope of TU, that is total utility curve, is called what? Option number 1 marginal utility, option number 2 utility, option number 3 average utility, or option number 4 none of the above. Any guesses? So the correct answer for this question is option number 1 marginal utility. When the total utility curve begins from the origin, जब total utility curve start होता है origin से, increases at a decreasing rate, reaches a maximum and then starts falling. Marginal utility curve is the slope of the total utility curve and given by marginal utility is equal to change in total utility upon change in Q. Here Q means quantity demanded. Okay, so next let's move to our another next question about total utility and marginal utility, and the question is marginal utility of the commodity becomes negative when TU of the commodity is what? Option number 1 rising, option number 2 constant, option number 3 falling, or option number 4 0. सही जवाब है option number C falling. When the consumption increases beyond the point of satisfaction, जब कंजम्पशन इंक्रीज कर जाता है बियॉन्ड द पॉइंट ऑफ सेटिस्फैक्शन से, देन द मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी बिकम्स नेगेटिव एंड टीयू स्टार्ट्स फॉलिंग. मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी नेगेटिव में आ जाता है एंड टीयू जो होता है टोटल यूटिलिटी वो फॉल, उसका ग्राफ फॉल डाउन होने लगता है. और अनदर इम्पॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन इज as the consumer has more units of a commodity, his total utility from the commodity, option number 1 increases less than in production, reaches a maximum and then falls. Option number 2, increases more than in production and then reaches a maximum. Option number 3, increases less than in proportion and then falls. Option number 4, falls becomes 0 and then negative. And the correct answer for this question is option number A, that is increases less than in production, reaches a maximum and then falls. Utility refers to the satisfaction gained from consuming a goods or services. Utility का मतलब होता है उपयोगिता. Utility means उपयोगिता. So, the total utility is usually defined as a quantifiable summation of satisfaction or happiness obtained from consuming multiple units of a particular goods or services. Our next question is, in marginal utility theory, utility is what? Option number 1, an ordinal concept. Option number 2, a cardinal concept. Or option number 3, both ordinal and cardinal concept. Or option number 4, none of the above. And the correct answer for this question is a cardinal concept. The cardinal utility states that the level of satisfaction a customer acquires after consuming any goods and services can be measurable and expressed in quantitative numbers. In this question बेसिकली ये पूछा गया था कि इन द मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी थ्योरी, जो मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी थ्योरी है उसमें यूटिलिटी का क्या मतलब था. यूटिलिटी का एक कंसेप्ट था. ऑर्डिनल मीन्स ऑर्डर्स में और कार्डिनल मीन्स नंबर्स में. सो इन द मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी थ्योरी द वेरी बेसिक इज अ कार्डिनल कॉन्सेप्ट जो कि मेज़र किया जा सकता है इन और एक्सप्रेस भी किया जा सकता है इन टर्म्स ऑफ क्वांटिटेटिव नंबर्स. ओके, सो next question. Our next question is also about marginal utility theory. In marginal utility theory, marginal utility of money is what? Option number 1, rises. Option number 2, falls. Option number 3, constant. Or option number 4, rise and then falls. And the correct answer is rises. According to the marginal utility theory, the utility in terms of per unit of money always rises, as the consumer always wants that they get the maximum utility in every worth of money they pay. According to this theory, according to marginal utility theory, जिसको हम हिंदी में कहते हैं सीमांत उपयोगिता सिद्धांत, जिसके अनुसार पैसे की प्रति यूनिट के संदर्भ में उपयोगिता हमेशा बढ़ती है, क्योंकि उपभोक्ता हमेशा ये चाहता है कि वे भुगतान किए गए प्रत्येक मूल्य में अधिकतम उपयोगिता प्राप्त करें, as they get the maximum utility in every worth of money they pay. So, following to this marginal utility theory, the correct answer is option number A, rises. Our next question is MRS is defined as option number 1, amount of goods Y given up in exchange for good X such that total utility is constant. Option number 2, amount of good X given up in exchange for good Y such that total utility is constant. Option number 3, amount of good Y given up in exchange for the good X such that the total utility rises. Or option number 4, amount of good Y given up in exchange for good X. And the correct answer for this question is option number A, amount of good Y given up in exchange for good X such that total utility is constant. So, in economics, the marginal rate of substitution is also known as MRS. It is the amount of good that a consumer is willing to consume compared to another good as long as the new good is equally satisfying. MRS is used in indifference theory to analyze consumer behavior. Our next question is from the indifference mean, that is also very important for our economics point of view. And the question is, indifference mean, option number 1, X is preferred to Y. Option number 2, X and Y are generally preferred. Option number 3, Y is preferred to X. Or option number 4, none of the above. And the correct answer for this question is option number B, X and Y are X and Y are equally. And the correct answer for this question is option number B, X and Y are equally preferred. In economics, to describe the point where individuals have no particular preference for either one good or another based on their relative quantities, that point is known as indifference. And that is the point where X and Y are equally preferred. Our next question is, which theory assumes ordinality of utility? Option number 1, an indifference curve theory. Option number 2, marginal utility theory. Option number 3, both A and B. And option number D, none of the above. And the correct answer is option number A, indifference curve theory. And the correct answer is option number A, indifference curve theory. Ordinal utility theory claim that it is only meaningful to ask which option is better than the other, but it is meaningless to ask how much better it is or how good it is. All of the theory of consumer decision making under conditions of certainty can be and typically is expressed in terms of ordinal utility. Our next question is related to budget, and the question is, budget set is a option number 1, all points on the budget line. Option number 2, right angled triangle formed by the budget line with the axis. Option number 3, points inside the budget line. Or option number D, points on the y-axis from where budget line starts and the points on x-axis where the budget line ends. And the correct answer for this question is option number B, right angled triangle formed by the budget line with the axis. Okay, so budget set. Actually, budget set is a bundle of combination of two commodities that the budget line represents. It lies below the budget line and it helps to determine the possible quantities. ये help करता है उन possible quantities को identify करने में for each item that a consumer can buy given their income and the market value of those two goods. So the correct answer for the budget set is right angle triangle होता है formed by the budget line, जो कि budget line से form होता है with the axis. Our next question is, decreasing slope of indifference curve is explained by what? Option number 1, law of constant MRS, that is marginal rate of substitution. Option number 2, law of diminishing marginal returns. Option number 3, law of diminishing marginal substitutions. Or option number D, law of demand. And the correct answer for this question is law of diminishing MRS. Essentially, MRS is the slope of indifference curve at any single point along the curve. Most indifference curves are usually convex because as you consume more of one good, you will consume less of other. So, MRS, marginal rate of substitution, will decrease as one moves down the indifference curve. So, the correct answer is option number C, law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution is the decreasing slope of the indifference curve is explained by this option. Our next question is, a straight downward sloping indifference curve means what? Option number 1, MRS is constant. Option number 2, MRS is 0. Option number 3, MRS is increasing. Option number 4, MRS is decreasing. And the correct answer for this question is option number 1, MRS is constant. Indifference curve can be straight lines if a slope is constant. Resulting in an indifference curve represents a downward sloping straight line. If the marginal rate of substitution is increasing, the indifference curve will be concave to the origin. Our next question is also about the indifference curve. So the question is, higher indifference curve means what? Option number 1, price of goods have reduced. Option number 2, consumer has more income. Option number 3, higher utility level. Or option number 4, all of the above. And the correct answer for this question is higher utility level. Higher indifference curve represents higher level of satisfaction. In any other words, of any other combination that lie on a higher indifference curve that away from origin represents higher level of satisfaction. Okay, so our next question is, MRS is given by which of the following options? Here MRS means marginal rate of substitution. Option number 1 is delta x minus delta y. Option number 2 or option number B is delta y minus delta x. Option number 3 is delta x upon delta y. Or option number D is delta y upon delta x. So the correct answer is, formula for the MRS is delta y upon delta x. MRS is calculated between two goods placed on an indifference curve displaying a frontier of utility for each combination of good x and a good y. The slope of this curve represents quantities of good X and good Y that you would be happy substituting for one another. Our next question is, when marginal utility is 0, total utility is what? Option number 1 0, option number 2 minimum, option number 3 maximum और option number 4 negative. As it is same question हमने इससे पहले कुछ slides में किया था. And the correct answer for this question is option number C, maximum. When marginal utility is 0, जब marginal utility 0 हो जाता है तब total utility maximum हो जाता है. ये it is based on law of diminishing marginal utility, which says as more and more units of a goods are consumed, marginal utility, that level of satisfaction derived from each successive unit, goes on falling because desire for a commodity tend to fall. So the correct answer is option number C. When the marginal utility is 0, total utility is maximum. Our next question is, when a consumer consumes only 2 goods, मतलब सपोज करो कोई कंज्यूमर है और वो सिर्फ 2 goods ही कंज्यूम कर रहा है. इफ प्राइस ऑफ वन ऑफ द गुड्स फॉल्स, द इंडिफरेंस कर्व इज व्हाट? ऑप्शन नंबर 1, इंडिफरेंस कर्व पे उसका क्या इफेक्ट पड़ेगा? ऑप्शन नंबर 1, शिफ्ट्स अपवर्ड, मतलब ऊपर की तरफ शिफ्ट कर जाएगा. ऑप्शन नंबर 2, कैन शिफ्ट बोथ अपवर्ड्स एंड डाउनवर्ड, दोनों की तरफ शिफ्ट कर सकता है, अपवर्ड या डाउनवर्ड. और ऑप्शन नंबर 3, shifts downward. Or option number 4, does not shift. So the correct answer is option number D, does not shift. Does not shift or move in any direction is the correct answer, because a consumer consumes only 2 goods. If the price of one good falls, indifference curve does not shift either upward or downward. Our next question is, if price of good X falls leading to increase in demand of good Y, then both the goods are option number 1, substitute goods, complementary goods, option number 3, not related goods, or option number 4, competitor goods. And the correct answer is option number B, is the complementary goods. If due to fall in the price of good X and the demand for good Y rises, the two goods are complements because these goods complete the demand of each other. For example, गुड एक्स हम सपोज कर लेते हैं आईफोन को, एंड गुड वाई सपोज कर लेते हैं आईफोन का जो चार्जर होता है उसको, जो अलग से ख़रीदना पड़ता है. सो इफ़ अगर हम गुड एक्स मीन्स आईफोन का प्राइस कम कर देते हैं, इफ़ आईफोन के प्राइसेस में कमी आती है, सो द डिमांड फॉर द गुड वाई प्राइस इज़ राइज. जो डिमांड होगी वाई की, मतलब गुड वाई की, दैट मीन्स चार्जर की, वो बढ़ जाएगी. क्यों? क्योंकि उसके साथ साथ उसका भी डिमांड बढ़ेगा. So these are the example of complementary goods. Our next question is, indifference curves were first introduced by whom? Option number 1, Adam Smith, option number 2, Myers, option number 3, Pareto, or option number 4, Edgeworth. And the correct answer is option number 4, Edgeworth. The theory of indifference curve was developed by Francis Isidro Edgeworth, who explained in his 1881 book the mathematics needed for their drawing. Later on, Vilfredo Pareto was the first author to actually draw these curves in his 1906 book. Okay, so the correct answer is option number D, Edgeworth. Indifference curve को इन्होंने सबसे पहले इंट्रोड्यूस किया था. Our next question is, Marshall has given the law of equimarginal utility. Option number 1, related to money, option number 2, related to goods, option number 3, in relation to both, मतलब money and goods, or option number 4, none of these. And the correct answer for this question is related to goods. Law of equimarginal utility explain करता है relationship between consumption of 2 or more products and what combination of consumption these products will give optimum satisfaction. Marginal utility means additional satisfaction gained by the consumer. One more unit of a commodity is known as marginal utility. So Marshall ने दिया था law of equimarginal utility related to goods. Our next question is, consumer is in equilibrium when MUX is equal to PUX, or option number 2, MUX is greater than PUX, option number 3, MUX is smaller than PX, or option number 4, MUX divided by PX. And the correct answer for this question is option number 1, that is MUX, marginal utility of the commodity X is equal to PUX. Consumer's equilibrium means a state of maximum satisfaction, a situation where a consumer spends his given income purchasing one or more commodities so that he gets maximum satisfaction and has no urge to change. This level of consumption given in the price of commodities is known as consumer's equilibrium. Our next question is for luxury goods, the demand is what? Option number 1 inelastic, option number 2 elastic, option number 3 perfectly inelastic, or option number 4 is highly elastic. And the correct answer for this question is highly elastic. Means demand for luxury goods increases when a person's wealth or income increases. Typically, the greater percentage increases in income, the greater the percentage increases in luxury item purchase. Since luxury goods are expensive, wealthy people are disproportionate consumers of luxury goods. So, the demand for the luxury goods is highly elastic. मतलब बहुत ही ज़्यादा elastic demand होती है इनकी. And our next question is लॉ ऑफ डिमांड इनमें से क्या है? ऑप्शन नंबर 1 क्वांटिटेटिव स्टेटमेंट, ऑप्शन नंबर 2 क्वालिटेटिव स्टेटमेंट, और ऑप्शन नंबर 3 बोथ ए एंड बी, और ऑप्शन नंबर 4 नन ऑफ द अबव. एंड द करेक्ट आंसर फॉर दिस क्वेश्चन इज option number B, qualitative statement. Law of demand is a qualitative statement. The law of demand is a qualitative statement and not a quantitative statement. This is because it does not tells us the exact correlation between the quantity demanded and the price. Hence, we can conclude that the law of demand is a qualitative statement, जो numbers के form में नहीं बताते हैं. So, law of demand is a qualitative statement. Our next question is for given goods price elasticity of demand is what? Option number 1 0, option number 2 negative, option number 3 positive, or option number D all of the above. And the correct answer for this question is option number C positive. क्योंकि जो गिफन गुड्स होते हैं उनकी प्राइस इलास्टिसिटी ऑफ डिमांड बहुत ही पॉजिटिव होती है. वेबलन और गिफन गुड्स आर द टू क्लासेस ऑफ गुड्स which has positive elasticity. Rare expectation or to the law of demand. Demand for a good is said to be inelastic when the elasticity is less than 1 in absolute value. Then its change in price have relatively small effect on the quantity demanded. Our last but not least question is violation of law of demand occurs when? Option number 1 negative income effect is greater than substitution effect. Option number 2 negative income effect is less than substitution effect. Option number 3 substitution effect is negative, or option number 4 income effect is negative. And the correct answer for this question is option number A, negative income effect is greater than the substitution effect. The income effect is greater than the substitution effect in given goods. Given goods are the expectations to the law of demand. Given goods are those highly inferior goods when even if their prices decrease, there will be decrease in the demand for those goods. So, violation of law of demand तभी होता है जब negative income effect is greater than substitution effect. So, the option number A is the correct answer. Okay, so it's all for today. Thank you so much for all your time and attention. Thank you so much for watching our video. I hope you have liked it. Please mention your doubts or any other recommendations for any other video or any other topic in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe our YouTube channel Vidyarthi Pro Learning Platform. Share it with your friends, colleagues and students. Thank you so much. Bye bye.